Thanks for having me here. The work that I'm presenting here is a cost analysis of some of the acute care virtual visits that we did over at Jefferson through the Jeff Connect on-demand program. So, as has likely been mentioned in many of the other presentations, growing prevalence of the use of direct-to-consumer telehealth options for particularly for patients in the acute care space. Many industry measures are derived from survey data completed immediately post-visit, and these reports are generally informal, end up reported in marketing materials, press releases, and oftentimes lack some of the background data analysis. So some of the prior literature to give some context, the work done by Lori and Acute had findings that showed on a per episode basis there were some savings, but overall in the long run, on an annual basis, telehealth users were $45 more expensive per year. So obviously the big difference is, large difference is the time frames amongst other things. So what we're looking at here is to see what the impact is of acute care virtual visits on the overall cost of providing that acute care. And we're going to do that through asking, through how patients, figuring out what patients would have done instead of the virtual visit, and also what they reportedly did after the virtual visit. And that second part is what doesn't get captured in what is oftentimes reported as cost savings by industry reporting. So this data was collected from Jefferson's Jeff Connect on-demand service through the telehealth department there. It collected patient data from those surveys between September 2015 and June 2016. And it's a retrospective analysis of those surveys. So the two surveys were a time of visit survey. The time of visit survey was administered immediately upon completion of the visit before you exit out of the application. And at that time, you're prompted the question, what would you have done if you had not done a virtual visit today? And you're given discrete answer options for alternative care settings. And the second survey is the follow-up visit survey, where 10 days following this visit, you're prompted via email to complete a survey where you're asked, in the 2 to 3 days following your telehealth visit, did you see a healthcare provider for that same issue? So by gathering the relative rates at which people responded to those first two survey questions and assigning a cost assumption to them, you can generate cost savings. The relative rates of the first survey give you cost savings from diversion from a care setting, and the second survey give you cost generated after the survey in the 2 to 3 days as they report them. The cost estimates we used were from existing telehealth cost literature, and rather than choosing one most appropriate or an average, we elected to use some goalposts to be most inclusive and make sure that be most conservative in what we're estimating to be the total cost savings value. It also helps to give a little idea of the sensitivity around some of the rates that we've collected via the surveys. So for the first survey, we had 429 respondents and pretty good 66% response rate. They're about 36.5, 2/3 female, and their chief complaints were dermatological and acute respiratory for the most part. And the way that they responded to this survey question at the time of the visit, we interpreted to mean, so for example, say the patients responded that 12% of them would have gone to the emergency department. We interpret that to mean they did not incur the cost of an emergency department visit and instead incurred a cost of that telehealth visit. Overall, most patients use the virtual visit as an alternative to an urgent care visit or a doctor's office visit. And notably, 16% said they would have done nothing. This is what we interpret to mean new utilization, and that is patients who would have done nothing at all and instead incurred that cost associated with the telehealth visit. Then on to the follow-up survey. It was responded to at a lower frequency, which we attribute to happening 10 days later and also via prompting via email. As was mentioned in a prior presentation, the survey that gets administered right after the visit is right there in front of you. So you're much more engaged with that one, and we think that may contribute to the lower response rate. The ages were similar and slightly more female population of respondents to this survey. And overall response rates indicated that the patients in the 2 to 3 days after the visit largely did nothing and did not seek any care for that same issue. So now to get into some of the specific calculations. I was going to apologize for the chart, but I love charts, so I'm not going to. So first we looked at the higher end of the cost estimates, and this is done in 2 steps. The top half up here, you see the specific care settings, the associated costs. This is the price differential between those care settings and the telehealth. Applying the rate that was surveyed in the time of visit survey and summing those gets a weighted average cost savings from diversion. This number is what most frequently gets reported in kind of that, like what you see in an industry report of cost savings from this visit without any consideration for that immediately subsequent care. So by incorporating the follow-up survey information, applying the same methodology, there's the cost, there's the frequency. It tempers down some of that immediate cost savings. And on the higher end, we estimated that net cost savings could be as high as $121 per virtual visit. And following the exact same method, using the lower end of the cost assumptions, we generate $19 per visit. And overall, so we generated a range of cost savings from between $19 to $121 per virtual visit, and this takes into account that immediately reported after visit utilization. Notable in there is that given the pretty enormous price differential between a telehealth visit and an emergency department visit, the degree to which people were diverted from the emergency department is the biggest factor. In the largest, using the largest assumptions, that factor contributed 75% of the cost savings, and using the least expensive assumptions, it contributed 63%, far more than any other factor. So some of the similar limitations were single site. There's survey biases involved in both the surveys. Specifically, as was mentioned in the work that Lori and Atif did, looking back, we ask a patient to look back and consider a decision that was already made, and then hypothetically consider our situation that we're applying to them. So there may be bias pushing them towards that real-life decision that they made and not really fully considering that hypothetical. So as it relates to the estimate of new utilization, we estimated 16%, which is a little bit higher than what we frequently saw of 10, 11, 12%. It's reported by Teladoc, American Well, but is meaningfully lower than 88% that's been reported recently. And the methodology and timeframes are certainly involved there. Finally, so the cost estimates we used were just generalized cost estimates used for comparing telehealth costs mostly from claims estimates. Those don't necessarily correlate perfectly with the patient population that gets surveyed here. As such, that's why we use the larger range to kind of give an estimate of the high end and low end, since our estimates of costs are not immediately directed to what the patients actually did that we surveyed. Finally, we only asked patients what they did in the 2 to 3 days after their visit. So any conclusion about costs beyond that time frame are kind of beyond the scope of what was estimated and evaluated in this situation. So overall, we conclude that acute care virtual visits save money in the short term by diverting patients from more expensive care. And that's it for me. Do you have any?
Okay, so I'll let you clap first. So this paper's now open for comments from everybody but Lori Usher Pines. Just kidding.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to know a little bit about Jeff Connect and who is eligible for it. So what kind of people are approaching the service to begin with? Like, is it across payers? Is it the Philadelphia area, South New Jersey area? You know, what's that patient population?
So it's open to anyone with the technology available to use it. Dr. Hollander, do you have a little more?
Yeah, so it's we rolled it out to our employees first, and then rolled it out to the public now over a year ago. So it's whoever calls in. More of our volume is from the public than from our employees. Some of them are affiliated with Jefferson, some of them are not. About 40% of patients who enter the app are actually new patients. So they're people that have not had a prior Jefferson relationship. Okay. But it's not sold to only employers, you know, unlike Teladoc, where you may sell to this employer and you have to be at that employer. If you're in the states we cover, you could call right now.
Hello, Krista Antoli with CTEL. I wanted to know, what was the model that you used to engage the patients? Was it audio only, or was it audio video, or was it audio video and medical tools?
So the Jeff Connect model is audio and video.
Okay.
And I don't believe there are any tools used during them. I think it was just discussion, one-on-one discussion, face-to-face via video with audio support.
This research is particularly exciting to CTEL because, as many of you probably know, we are conducting a telehealth reimbursement coalition to actually get research to the Congressional Budget Office to hopefully show telemedicine is either cost savings or cost neutral. I'd love to follow up with you after the meeting to see if we could actually include this in our research study.
Yes, you can.
Thanks, Doctor.
I'm available.
His cell phone number is.
Hi, Pete Greenwald from Weill Cornell, New York Presbyterian. We're modeling our program very similar to the one you have, at least a certain aspect of our direct-to-consumer offering from the ED. I'm curious about the $49 price point. I just did a quick napkin calculation of our cost per patient visit that we've had so far, and comparing the cost of our program to the institution to the number of visits, I think I came out to about $50,000 per visit.
Yeah,
So I'm curious if you made any effort to actually determine what the costs are to the institution per visit, rather than what the charge is.
That's actually a good point, because as many telehealth programs are starting off, there's just so much fixed cost involved with getting it off the ground. So by using the closest thing you can get to a variable cost here that I found in literature was that outward-facing price. Any other estimate would result in these huge fluctuations of ranges that were determined upon how long it had been since the telemedicine program had been kicked off. So to answer your question, in this model that we use, it doesn't get factored in the fixed costs. This is the best proxy we found for kind of the variable costs based on the available information that I found.
I noticed in your 10-day post-survey, it did not indicate if they had a follow-up virtual visit. Were you able to capture that at all to see if they called in again and had a repeat visit for that follow-up care?
That's a great question, and I did not look at that, so thank you.
But I'll add to that. But before we publish the paper, we will, because we have that data. That's a great idea. It's anecdotally, it's a small number. It's not going to be something that moves the needle, but it's a great idea to include that.
You had 74, in the same line of what she spoke, 74% had a do nothing in the follow-up.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a sense for how many times in the Jeff Connect engagement they were told to have a follow-up? You do need to go see a doctor or go to the emergency room.
I don't have them here, but we do have data around whether the issue that was brought up was resolved or whether a referral was made or a recommendation was made to see another thing, but that would be another great thing to report alongside this.
Can I just ask a question? And what would the right way to look at that be? If we recommend they go, should we be removing them from the denominator? Sort of seems like if we're using this as a triage tool to say, the one that sticks in my mind at 3 o'clock in the morning was a woman who had just been discharged after some OB operation. She was 2 days out, and she called me from the living room. I woke up and I got this terrible, terrible sharp pain in my chest whenever I take a deep breath, and I said, yeah, so we're not going to fix this on the phone, right? And so, she climbed into bed with her boyfriend or her husband or whoever he was, and said,
Well, both.
Hey, yeah, there was just one person, and she said, hon, the doc says we got to go to the ER. And, she still got me on her smartphone, and he goes, what doc? Who's that? Anyway, I said as she was walking, I was going to stay with her until she got into a cab. She was just a couple blocks from a hospital. And as she walked into her staircase in her apartment building in Philly, the guy lost signal, right? With this woman who's holding her chest, clutching with, until proven otherwise, a giant PE. Yeah, so should we be removing them from the denominator if we tell them go get care somewhere else?
Not in a cost.
From the follow-up, not?
Not in a cost.
Yeah, I don't think so.
You're right,
I think
not
it would be good to know. Look, that's an important outcome.
Yeah.
That somebody called in and you said go straight to the
Yeah. I'll
and
stay
they
with
did
you. Yeah.
and they did go to the ED. So
Right.
no, I wouldn't take them out.
Yeah, so, one comment that's not built into this is we didn't build in what if you went to the ED and got admitted, under the assumption that you were going to go to the ED and get admitted anyway at some point in time. But the interesting data here, because, ER docs, which is what we are answering this, always say follow up with somebody, right? That's the end of everything. But the people that went to the ER, 2/3 of them actually got admitted or got a procedure done. So what we found is we weren't sending people unnecessarily to the ED because they actually got serious stuff. That makes me wonder we weren't sending people enough when you have a 2/3 rate, going there. But interesting finding. Wendy?
Yeah. I'm Karen Cotton. I'm from Old Dominion University. I just have a question back to who are the people that are using this program? Do you have any idea about education level for the general public? And is that, the repeat offenders who go to the emergency room for their care all the time, are they less likely to do that if they're using your program?
So I can only answer that anecdotally from the calls that I sit on, and Brendan sits on some too, so we could speak from our personal experience. We know they're about 2/3 women. We know they're, sort of soccer mom, 35 to 40-year-old age range. We know that some of them have prior relationships with our institution because we have, as Deb Glassman just presented, we have actually a really robust scheduled visit program, and I mentioned yesterday that about 90% of our calls, in fact, yesterday 97% of our calls were scheduled visits. So we're starting to see our own patients learn more about this. And I think the educational level, I don't know the right politically correct way to say this, probably exceeds that which we see in the ED, and probably slightly exceeds that which we see in our office-based practice. But I see a lot of people that, clearly are not college educated that are calling in on this. So I think it's a whole spectrum. And I think although this has less to do with the abstract, one of the things that I think all of us in this room need to be careful about is telemedicine's not the answer to everything. It's the answer to the right problems for the right patient. And so the patient has to be the one that chooses that. So, it may be it may be hard for us in research world because there's a bias towards a type of patient that may be different than those who go for the scheduled visits, but that's the right patient to use telemedicine. They really should self-select, given their problems. But my guess is it's, younger, more women and a little more educated than the average hospital-based patient. And we'll make this the last question because we have some panelists that want to talk too. But Garrison, great stimulating discussion.
Thanks very much. I think maybe another area of cost that can be looked at in the future, and especially as search is proceeding, is the cost to the consumer themselves. What is, if we can come up with a measurement of the disruption of life for the consumer itself? I mean, we have miles saved, we have time saved, but things like taking off work, and this is especially relevant in pediatrics, for instance.